The peace of the blessed Lord be with you. Christ asumdwe enka. Enra day na ye share ye akomchirimre mu adesua ne ye mpaebɔ nase. We began our Lenten journey after our 8-day prayer, which ended on the 22nd. So we started reflecting on the book of Genesis right from chapter 12. And yesterday we read God asking Abraham to move from his land, his relatives, his father's house, to an unknown land that God was directing him. Then there was a promise that God was going to give him descendants and a land. So the promise from God entails two things: descendants and a land. From chapter 12 to chapter 50, as we reflect and read, I would want us to read every chapter beginning from chapter 12 with this promise in mind: the promise of descendants and the promise of a land. Yesterday in chapter 12, Abraham indeed listened to God and he moved as the Lord directed him. In Genesis 12 verse 4, he comes to the land of Shechem. There he builds an altar for the Lord. The view, the promise is to move to Canaan. Remember in chapter 11, the father of Abraham, who was called Terah, had the dream of settling in Canaan, but he did not realize it. So God makes it a promise. For Terah, it was not a promise. He had a dream, a desire. But for Abraham to acquire that land, to possess it, to inherit it, was a promise from God. Two things. Let's not confuse them. Terah, the father of Abraham, wanted to move to Canaan by his own force, his own power, his own energy. For Abraham to move to Canaan was a promise. To inherit Canaan was a promise from God. So a promise of land and a promise of descendants. In chapter 12, what we realize is that Abraham faces two obstacles against these two promises: the promise of a land and the promise of descendants. And these are the two obstacles. The first is that he comes to the land on his journey and the land is not fertile enough and there is famine. Because of the famine, Abraham has to move beyond the land, and this landed him in Egypt. And in Egypt, there was a second threat. That was the threat to the descendants. Abraham was to have descendants through the wife Sarah. But because the wife was beautiful, Abraham lied that Sarah was the sister, and he nearly offered Sarah on a silver platter to Pharaoh. That was the threat. If Abraham was to have descendants, the descendants were to come through the wife Sarah. But here was Abraham offering Sarah to another man. Because he has left the land, because he has gone to sojourn on a new land, and he comes to face these two threats. So that is chapter 12 of the book of Genesis. We're reading this with the promise in mind. We come to chapter 13 today, Thursday, the 2nd day of March. Where is Abraham now? After the episode in Egypt, he comes back to the Negev with his nephew Lot. And because both of them have possessions, the land was not enough for them. What did Abraham do? He asked the nephew, we shouldn't fight among ourselves because we are the same blood. Let's divide this land. Make a choice. If you go right, I'll go left. If you go left, I'll go right. Then Lot makes a choice. He moves. And it is only when Lot has moved that the Lord will direct Abraham. Look at what Abraham does. He allows Lot to make the choice. And when Lot has made the choice, look at what God does. Let's look at Genesis chapter 13, verse number 8. So Abraham said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, or between your herders and my herders, for we are kindred, that is, we are blood. It's not the whole land available. Please separate from me. If you prefer the left, I'll go right. If you prefer right, I'll go left. Lot looked round about and saw how abundantly watered the whole Jordan plain was as far as Zoar, like the garden of the Lord. This was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So the Lord chose for himself the whole Jordan plain and set eastward. So they separated. Abraham settled still in the Negeb, a dry land. It was not fertile. Now the inhabitants of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. That was where Lot has pitched his tent. Verse 14. After Lot had parted from him, God is speaking to Abraham. Look about you. Your nephew is gone. Now look all around you. From where you are, gaze to the north, gaze to the south, gaze to the east, gaze to the west. All the land that you see, I'll give you and your descendants forever. But remember, still there's a threat to the promise. He still hasn't got the descendants because the wife is barren. And the land is still not fertile. I'll make your descendants like the dust of the earth. In chapter 15, God will ask Abraham to look up into the skies and count the stars. Today, he is not looking up into the skies. He's looking round about him. The directional points, north, south, east, and west. God is asking Abraham to measure the land because this land is going to be for him. Friends, our prayer tonight is realizing unrealized promises. How do you realize your unrealized promises? I'll send the prayer points to you, and I pray as you reflect again, slowly, meditatively on chapters 12, 13, you allow the Spirit of God to move you to pray these prayers. God bless you. Let's continue our journey. Tomorrow, Friday, reading chapter 14 of the book of Genesis. Peace be with you. Stay blessed. Amen.